In the last few years, employment tribunals have just been absolutely flooded with disability discrimination claims.
Oh, totally flooded. It's a massive spike.
Yeah, and here is the truly shocking part when you look at the data. The companies losing these huge lawsuits, they aren't necessarily run by, malicious villains trying to force people out.
Right, right.
They're actually run by thousands of mid-level managers who are just completely paralyzed by one single, incredibly vague legal word. And that word is reasonable.
Yes, reasonable. It's such a trap.
It really is. So welcome back to this Custom Tailor Deep Dive. Today we are opening up a massive government-commissioned document from the UK known as the Thames Review.
Which is just a fascinating read, by the way.
It is. And we are putting it right alongside a proposed operational solution called the N1F. That stands for the Neurodiversity Workplace Adjustments Framework.
It's a really critical stack of sources you've provided for us today, honestly, especially because it takes this concept we all think we understand, workplace accommodations, and just reveals how fundamentally broken the machinery behind it actually is.
Yeah, exactly. So the mission for this deep dive is to unpack that massive systemic failure in how modern workplaces handle employee adjustments, and then we're going to rigorously explore the actual blueprint designed to fix it.
Which is desperately needed.
Seriously. And if you are listening to this right now, whether you manage a team, work in HR, or you're simply an employee trying to navigate the friction of the modern corporate landscape, understanding how organizations balance health, performance, and their legal duties is absolutely crucial to surviving and thriving at work.
Because right now, the system is breaking people. And it is costing companies millions in legal fees.
Millions. Okay, let's unpack this.
So I think the best place to start is looking at the catalyst, right? Governments do not commission independent sweeping reviews like the one led by Professor Chris Timms unless an infrastructure is, actively collapsing.
Yeah, they don't just do it for fun.
Exactly. The Timms review was triggered by the massive surge in tribunal claims you mentioned. Employees who needed help were facing these excruciatingly long delays.
Right.
But more importantly, the decisions being made were wildly inconsistent. So you had massive legal exposure because, say, an employee in the marketing department might get the support they need.
But then someone else doesn't.
Right. An employee in accounting at the exact same company gets managed out of the business for the exact same condition.
Wow. And reading through the sources, a lot of this liability really seems to boil down to how companies interpret the Equality Act in the UK. Specifically, like we said, that phrase, reasonable adjustments.
Yeah, it sounds so nice in a corporate brochure.
Right. But the review shows that in practice, it is a total nightmare. What is reasonable to a multinational tech firm is obviously different than what is reasonable to a local logistics company.
Completely different.
But the Timms review found that even within the exact same enterprise, managers have absolutely no working definition of the word. They are essentially just guessing.
They're guessing, and they are doing it while operating under immense operational pressure. The cornerstone of disability law in the workplace is the requirement to remove disadvantages for disabled employees.
Okay.
But you have line managers who are trained to, hit Q3 sales targets, suddenly being asked to interpret complex employment law and occupational health mandates on the fly.
Right, which they aren't trained for at all.
Not at all. And so the system becomes entirely reactive. A manager literally doesn't think about reasonable adjustments until an employee is already in crisis or missing targets or having a breakdown.
So if I can just try to visualize the bureaucracy we're dealing with here, it's essentially like a building inspector identifying that a commercial property needs a wheelchair ramp.
Okay, I like this.
But instead of hiring an architect or giving anyone a real blueprint, the CEO just asks 100 different department managers to go out into the parking lot and build one.
Yes. Just figure it out.
Exactly. Nobody is given tools, nobody is given a budget, and nobody is given a legal definition of a compliant incline. They just wing it.
And predictably, somebody eventually falls.
Right, somebody falls, and the whole company ends up in a tribunal.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. What's fascinating here is that the Timms review proves these tribunal cases are not just isolated incidents of bad managers.
That's a bigger issue.
Exactly. If 100 managers build 100 dangerous ramps, you don't have a personnel problem, you have a systemic infrastructure failure. It is an environment that disproportionately disadvantages disabled and neurodivergent employees precisely because it relies on individuals to interpret corporate liability.
Without a standardized framework.
Yes. without any framework at all.
Which means we really need to look at Professor Tim's specific diagnosis of the wreckage. What is actually happening on the ground that causes this machinery to jam up so badly?
Well, the sources point to a few massive bottlenecks.
Yeah, the first one being that the current process is incredibly slow and just highly medicalized.
Yeah.
Employers are demanding an immense amount of medical evidence before they will even authorize a different keyboard, let alone a flexible schedule.
Yeah. That obsession with the medical model is perhaps the biggest failing identified in the review. The corporate reflex is to just demand a doctor's note or a formal diagnosis for literally everything.
Which is ridiculous.
It is, because we know the reality of modern healthcare. Getting an appointment with a specialist, say a neurologist or an adult ADHD assessor, that can take anywhere from 14 months to over 2 years, depending on where you live.
2 years. I mean, I can easily imagine the psychological toll that takes on an employee. You are struggling. Your daily friction is incredibly high. Your performance is inevitably dropping.
And you're probably being placed on a performance improvement plan.
Exactly. And your company's response is, well, we can't help you until you bring us a piece of paper from a specialist you literally cannot get an appointment to see.
And while the employee is just languishing in that medical waiting room, the manager is experiencing what we can call managerial paralysis.
Managerial paralysis.
Right. The manager sees the performance dropping. They might even actually want to help. But the review found they simply do not know how to assess an employee's needs without that medical document.
They're stuck.
They are. They don't know how to balance the worker's declining health with the department's rigid performance targets. So they just freeze.
Wow.
They do nothing. Or they initiate disciplinary action, which of course immediately triggers a legal violation.
Right. Now, the sources also point out a massive blind spot in this medicalized model. It completely fails people with non-obvious or fluctuating conditions.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the corporate structure was clearly built for static, highly visible disabilities. You know, if you break your leg, you come in with a cast, the barrier is obvious, and the adjustment is super easy to understand.
It's very straightforward.
But the review specifically highlights how this static model just destroys neurodivergent employees, or those with mental health struggles, sensory processing issues, or like episodic conditions like multiple sclerosis.
Conditions where Tuesday might be perfectly fine, but Thursday is completely debilitating.
Yes, exactly.
And the traditional system demands a static box to check. A fluctuating condition doesn't fit neatly into an HR drop-down menu, you know?
No, it doesn't.
When a system is built solely to accommodate permanent, visible physical limitations, it inherently discriminates against neurological or episodic realities.
I want to push back on one of the review's major conclusions here, actually, because as I was reading the source material, this immediately raised a red flag for me.
Okay, let's hear it.
The Tim's review heavily criticizes what it calls high levels of manager discretion. It basically frames this as a fundamental flaw. But isn't manager discretion supposed to be a good thing?
You would think so, yeah.
Right, we always talk about wanting empathetic leaders. Doesn't a manager know their specific team, their workflow, and their individual employees way better than some faceless HR policy? Why are we suddenly framing human flexibility as a systemic disease?
It is a totally valid challenge, and flexibility sounds ideal, you know, in a utopian corporate culture,
Yeah.
but we have to look at the data from the employment tribunals.
Okay.
In practice, high discretion means a worker's ability to do their job and their access to basic equitable treatment depends entirely on a manager lottery.
A manager lottery. Explain the mechanics of that lottery.
So if you draw a winning ticket, meaning you get a manager who happens to be highly empathetic, deeply knowledgeable about neurodivergence and proactive, you get your adjustments.
Okay, great.
But if you draw a losing ticket, a manager who is super stressed about their own KPIs, maybe skeptical of invisible disabilities, or just plain ignorant of the Equality Act, you are denied.
Ah, I see.
That high discretion leads to vast inequalities between different teams within the exact same building. Your fundamental legal rights as an employee should never depend on the personal opinions, unconscious biases, or even just the current stress level of your direct supervisor.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, when discretion is high, legal compliance is almost always low.
I hear what you're saying about the lottery, but it still feels kind of counterintuitive. I'm thinking about a time at a former job where I literally just needed a different type of ergonomic chair because of lower back pain.
Right, a simple request.
Yeah. I had a great manager who just said, sure, order it. But because of the corporate policy, it had to go through 3 levels of procurement. an ergonomic assessment, and a vendor approval process that literally took 4 months.
4 months for a chair.
Yes, my manager's discretion was the only fast human part of the process. If we remove that discretion, don't we just end up with more of that horrific bureaucratic quicksand?
That is the exact tension the Timms review exposes. The bureaucracy you experienced was absolutely broken, but your manager bypassing it didn't fix the company's liability or standardize care for the next person who needed a chair.
Oh, okay, that's fair.
The goal isn't to replace manager empathy with an unfeeling bureaucracy, right? The goal is to replace manager inconsistency with a streamlined, legally compliant framework. Empathy simply does not scale across a 50,000-person enterprise.
Wow. Empathy doesn't scale. That reframes it perfectly for me. You need a system that guarantees the chair or the flexible hours, regardless of who is approving the timesheet.
Exactly.
So Professor Timms identifies this disease, the delays, the medical obsession, the managerial lottery, and he prescribes a cure. But looking closely at the findings, there is a glaring operational void here.
A massive void.
The prescription is completely missing the actual ingredients required to compound the medication.
The recommendations in the review are, on paper, objectively excellent. Tim suggests clearer national guidance, faster processes that require significantly less medical proof, mandatory training to cure that managerial paralysis,
All good things.
and a major shift toward preventative, proactive approaches. He explicitly calls for a system that aligns with the Equality Act by reducing that problematic manager discretion.
But I noticed the gap immediately. The review tells these massive organizations what they need to achieve to stop getting sued, but it completely leaves out the mechanics of how to actually achieve it.
Precisely. It is a diagnostic document, not an operational one.
Right.
The Timms review does not provide a national operational framework. It doesn't define a standardized process flow. It doesn't actually explain the mechanism by which a company is supposed to remove manager discretion without, causing a corporate mutiny.
Which would totally happen.
Oh, absolutely. It lacks any sort of governance structure. And crucially, it completely ignores the operational reality of performance metrics. Like, how do you handle a sales quota during a phased return to work? The review is silent on that.
To go back to our earlier metaphor,
Yeah.
it's like the Timms review is the building inspector showing up, handing the CEO a citation that says, hey, your foundation is crumbling and your ramps are illegal. You need to fix this.
Right.
And then the inspector just drives away. There are no architectural blueprints, no scaffolding, and no instructions on how to retrofit the building while thousands of employees are still actively working inside it.
You just have executives staring at a legal citation with no implementable model.
Which leaves companies in a highly vulnerable position. They now officially know their processes are broken. They've been told they're likely violating the Equality Act, but they possess no functional wrench to fix the machinery.
And nature abhors a vacuum, especially a corporate policy vacuum.
Yes, it does. And since the Timms review left this massive how-to gap, we transition to the second half of our source material. This is where the NWAF enters the picture.
The game changer.
The Neurodiversity Workplace Adjustments Framework. It is explicitly designed to be the architectural blueprint. It is designed to fill those exact operational holes left by the government review.
The NABUF takes the theoretical, high-level recommendations of the Timms review and just translates them into a uniform, repeatable, step-by-step national process. It is the operational scaffolding that was missing.
Let's really dig into the actual mechanics of this blueprint, because the biggest shift here, the one that really changes the paradigm, is the move to a barrier-based assessment.
Yes.
We talked about how broken the medicalized model is. How does the NWAF actually bypass the doctor's note?
This is the operational core of the framework. Under a barrier-based assessment, the company stops asking what is medically wrong with you and starts asking what specific friction in your environment is preventing you from executing your role.
Oh, wow.
It removes the burden of diagnosis entirely.
Give me a tangible example of how that works, like on a Tuesday afternoon in a corporate office.
Okay, let's take an employee who is neurodivergent, perhaps dealing with sensory processing issues or ADHD, working in a modern open-plan office.
Which can be super overwhelming.
The environment is loud, visually chaotic, and they are completely unable to focus. Under the old medical model, HR demands a formal neurological assessment to prove they have a recognized condition before they will approve any environmental changes.
And that is the 2-year wait list we discussed earlier.
A complete bottleneck. But under the NWAF's barrier-based model, the manager and HR simply acknowledge the friction. The barrier is the auditory and visual noise of the open office.
Right.
The solution is providing noise-canceling headphones, or maybe moving their desk to a quiet corner, or allowing 2 days of remote work. It literally does not matter what the medical diagnosis is, or if they even have one yet.
That is so simple.
What matters is identifying the barrier and deploying the solution.
It's like instead of HR demanding a doctor's note proving you have a medical condition that makes you cold before they let you use a space heater, they just acknowledge the barrier. You are shivering and hand you the heater.
Exactly.
It is incredibly efficient. It treats the employee as the expert on their own environmental friction. It takes that abstract legal jargon about reasonable adjustments and turns it into an immediate, actionable workflow.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it effectively operationalizes the Equality Act.
But I do want to push on the structural side of this for a second. We talked about how the manager lottery was a huge liability.
Right.
If we are using this barrier-based assessment, but the manager is still the one deciding whether to approve the headphones or the remote days, haven't we just kept the lottery intact? Like, the manager could still just say no.
And that brings us to the second major mechanic of the NWEF governance hubs.
Governance hub.
The framework actively removes that problematic manager discretion by making adjustments mandatory and controlled by a centralized body rather than an individual supervisor.
See, I am looking at this governance hub concept in the notes, and my immediate cynical thought as someone who has worked in corporate environments is, great, another committee.
I know, it sounds like more red tape.
Right. We're taking the decision away from the frontline manager, but aren't we just funneling it into a new bureaucratic bottleneck? How is a hub faster than a manager?
It is a critical distinction to make. A governance hub is not some sprawling committee that meets once a month. It is a dedicated, specialized operational unit.
Okay.
Think of it as a triage team consisting of specific representatives, usually an HR policy expert, an operations lead, and perhaps an occupational health liaison. They operate as a neutral, independent jury.
So they actually possess the expertise the manager lacks.
Exactly. A line manager might deal with a complex workplace adjustment request once a year, meaning they have to relearn the policy, panic about the legalities, and basically guess at the outcome every single time.
Which sounds incredibly stressful.
It is. But the governance hub processes these daily. They review the barrier-based assessment, and they mandate the adjustment based on standardized NWEF criteria. The manager is removed from the decision-making process entirely.
You just take it out of their hands.
The hub simply informs the manager. This adjustment has been approved and will be implemented.
Honestly, that actually sounds like a massive relief for the managers themselves. They don't want to play armchair doctor or amateur employment lawyer. They just want their team to be able to work.
Precisely. This embeds legal compliance directly into the daily operational flow, which drastically reduces the employer's exposure to those tribunals.
Because it creates consistency.
Yes. The employee in marketing and the employee in accounting now receive the exact same barrier-based evaluation from the exact same neutral hub. The lottery is officially closed.
That's brilliant. Now, there's another crucial gap from the TIMS review that the NWAF fills, and it has to do with the operational reality of business. Prorated performance metrics.
Yes, this is huge.
The sources highlight this, and I want to spend some time on it because this seems to be where the friction between HR policy and revenue targets really catches fire. Explain how NWAF tackles this.
This is where we see the most profound mathematical failure in the old system. Think about a software developer returning to work after a severe episode of clinical burnout, or maybe dealing with a fluctuating physical condition.
So,
HR and the manager agree to grant them a phased return, say working 3 days a week instead of 5 while they recover.
which sounds great on paper, a perfectly reasonable adjustment.
It sounds great until performance review time. Because incredibly, under the traditional system, the operational side of the business would often still judge that developer's output against a 5-day-a-week key performance indicator.
Wait, really? They're setting them up for mathematically guaranteed failure. Welcome back. We know you were only here 60% of the time. Well, why aren't you hitting 100% of your sprint deliverables?
Yep.
That is madness.
Yeah.
It completely invalidates the accommodation.
It is madness, but it happens constantly because HR systems and operations systems rarely speak the same language. The NWIF explicitly forces them to.
How so?
It legally requires that performance expectations be mathematically aligned with an employee's actual adjusted capacity. If you are approved for a 3-day week, Your sprint points, your sales quota, or your project deliverables are strictly prorated to 60%.
Wow.
The framework protects the employee from being penalized for the very condition they are receiving adjustments for.
So the framework is incredibly robust. We have the barrier-based assessments bypassing the medical waiting rooms. We have governance hubs removing manager bias and standardizing the process. And we have prorated metrics protecting the employee's career trajectory.
It covers all the bases.
It really does. So we have established how the NWEF works mechanically. But looking at the final sections of our sources, there's a massive philosophical shift regarding timing. Why does when an organization acts matter just as much as how they act?
Because the entire premise of the old failing system was reactive firefighting. The TIMS review showed us that organizations wait for the employee to burn out, to miss critical targets, to go on long-term sick leave, and then they try to investigate what adjustments might have prevented it. The NWAF shifts the entire paradigm to structural prevention.
The sources mention something called preventative triggers. What does that actually look like for you, the listener, navigating your own company?
Well, under the NWAF, the conversation about workplace barriers isn't triggered by failure. It is initiated automatically at the point of a life cycle change.
Like when you first start.
Exactly. When you are onboarded as a new hire, when you return from any kind of leave, when you change job roles, or even when you are assigned a new manager. At each of these junctions, the system proactively prompts a barrier-based assessment.
It normalizes the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Think about your own workplace. How often do people only get help after they've missed deadlines or had a breakdown? NWAF flips that script.
It really does.
It's the difference between doing routine, scheduled maintenance on your vehicle's transmission versus ignoring it until the engine violently seizes on the highway, and then trying to negotiate with a tow truck driver while cars are swerving around you.
That's exactly it.
One is an operational cost, the other is a catastrophic emergency.
And if we look at the financial ROI for the company, that preventative stance, combined with the independent oversight from the governance hubs, is exactly what stops the hemorrhage of legal fees. You are solving the problem upstream before a grievance is ever filed.
It is a remarkably elegant blueprint for a deeply complicated, often painful corporate reality.
It really is.
We started this deep dive looking at a system in utter disarray. We saw reactive, highly medicalized frameworks buckling under the pressure of tribunal claims, with well-meaning managers totally paralyzed by vague legal definitions.
A total mess.
The TIMS review did the vital work of diagnosing that structural rot, exposing the manager lottery, and the failure to support those with neurodivergence or invisible conditions.
But it stopped at the diagnosis. It left organizations staring at their liability with no functional tools to repair it.
Exactly. And that is where the NWEF steps in to finish the job. It offers a legally aligned operational framework. It bypasses the endless wait for medical proof by focusing strictly on environmental barriers.
And it removes the burden of legal interpretation from individual managers through those specialized governance hubs.
Yes, and mathematically prorates performance metrics, so people are not set up to fail.
It completely inverts the corporate dynamic. Instead of forcing a human being to fracture themselves to fit a rigid organizational mold, it creates a system where the organization possesses the mechanical flexibility to adapt to the human.
I really want to thank you, the listener, for bringing these specific sources to the table today. We all talk endlessly about wanting inclusive, equitable workplaces, but these documents pull back the curtain and show us the actual unglamorous gears, levers, and policies required to make that a reality.
And analyzing these mechanics raises a fascinating question, something I'd love to leave you pondering today.
Oh, definitely. Let's hear it.
We have spent this time exploring how the NWAFO successfully uses a barrier-based approach to standardize support and proactively remove friction for neurodivergent and disabled employees.
Right.
Right? Completely sidestepping the need for them to prove their medical history.
Right.
But if we pull back the lens even further, how might this barrier-based approach eventually change the fundamental way we measure productivity and capacity for every single employee in the future?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If corporate structures stop focusing on what is wrong with the worker and start focusing entirely on systematically removing the operational friction in their way, what kind of unprecedented potential could a workplace actually unlock?
What an incredible thought to end on. If we fix the systemic friction for the most vulnerable, we inevitably build a stronger, more efficient engine for everyone else. Thank you so much for joining us on this custom deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep digging into the incredible sources you find, and we will catch you on the next one.